Well, it says that if you challenge the structures of power, and in particular, particularly military power, you are at best marginalized, if not imprisoned. You know, those kind of few radical voices that held fast, Randolph Bourne, Jane Addams, Eugene Debs, were excoriated in the press. Emma Goldman eventually deported, along with Alexander Berkman and others. So, yeah, it's, you know, war, as Randolph Bourne said, is the health of the state. And what you saw in World War I was the rise of the military corporate machine, which made war against these radicals through the Sedition Act, the Espionage Act, and more importantly, the Committee for Public Information, or the Creel Commission, which created the system of modern mass propaganda, employing the understanding of crowd psychology pioneered by figures like Le Bon, Trotter, and Sigmund Freud, that people were not moved by fact or reason. They were moved by the very skillful manipulation of emotion. And it worked. So you had, Hollywood was making films like The Kaiser, The Butcher of Berlin. The Creel Commission had its own news division. You couldn't even write anti-war editorials. It was against the law. It had speakers bureaus, and you only had to use the Sedition Act and espionage on those kind of few figures who held fast to an anti-war stance, of which there were not many. And you read people like Jane Addams, and part of what they are most depressed about is how easily the intellectual class, even the purportedly left intellectual class, was seduced into the war effort. And then after the war, the dreaded Hun becomes the dreaded Red, and we enter what Dwight McDonald calls this psychosis of permanent war in the name of anti-communism. You know, war, the fusion of war, and the war profiteers, the militarists and the war profiteers, which after World War II created a situation of total war. I mean, after World War I, factories reconverted for to produce domestic products. After World War II, they kept producing weapons, even though we had peace, so that we could obliterate every Soviet city 10 times over with nuclear weapons. I mean, it was nuts. But with, you know, guaranteed cost overruns and guaranteed profits, that fusion of the militarists and the corporatists hijacked the country, disemboweled the country economically, and made war on all of those advances that had come under the New Deal. So it had both an economic impact and a political impact.
And the U.S. is undoubtedly the world's biggest, most strongest empire, history's biggest and strongest empire, but it operates in a different way than empires past. How has the notion of empire changed over the last century?
America is unique in the sense that it colonized itself. So European countries colonized India, Africa, the Spanish, you know, and the Americas. We destroyed, through acts of genocide, our indigenous communities and plundered their resources. So you had, especially with westward expansion, the U.S. cavalry acting on behalf of the mining concerns, the railroad companies, the timber merchants. And once westward expansion was complete, by the end of the 19th century, you began expansion beyond U.S. borders. That's when you had the Cuban-American War with the seizure of Cuba and the Philippines. You began to see all sorts of gunboat diplomacy throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, in particular Central America. America expanded its power, certainly through the military force and the threat of military force, but more by cultivating indigenous elites that would do our bidding. So you saw the rise of all sorts of dictatorships, you know, whether it was Mobutu in the Congo, or whether Somoza in Nicaragua, or the Shah in Iran. And of course, we overthrew the Shah's father and then carried out a coup d'etat to replace Mossadegh, the prime minister who was going to nationalize British oil. You know, that form of colonial power protected Western interests. That's why Allende was overthrown in 1973 and Pinochet was put in power, to protect the copper industry, from being nationalized. And these elites were given tremendous resources. I mean, you saw the same thing in 1954 in Guatemala with Arbenz, who wanted to challenge United Fruit's huge acquisition of Guatemalan land to give landless peasants, an ability to, carry out subsistence farming. And when that happened, the CIA raised a kind of black army, a huge propaganda effort run by Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations, who had come out of the Creel Commission. And of course, Arbenz becomes a communist in the eyes of the press, which they, through the manipulation of the press, they are able to justify this. So it's a different kind of empire in the sense that, for instance, British troops actually occupied India, although many of those troops were Sikhs, raised from the Sikhs. We find, venal elites who will do our bidding, and when people rise up against those elites, then we provide those elites with the resources by which they can crush any form of rebellion.
I wanted to talk about El Salvador in particular, because you've obviously covered extensively the horrors of U.S. wars all over that region. What did this conflict in particular reveal about the lengths the empire will go to maintain economic hegemony?
So it's 1979 and the Sandinistas win in Nicaragua. And this sets off all kinds of alarm bells because the Sandinistas, unlike Somoza, who was the dictator of Nicaragua, who was overthrown and later assassinated in Paraguay, were not going to protect U.S. business interests. And they did not want to see this spread throughout the region. And so I covered the war there from 1983 to 1988. And we saw the Reagan administration pump tremendous military, economic, intelligence resources into defeating the rebel group known as the Farabundo Martí National Liberation Front. When I first got to El Salvador in 1983, the FMLN was winning the war. They created the Reagan administration. They brought in a huge helicopter fleet, 70 Hueys, that they put up in the air, which made it hard for these guerrilla groups to mass in any kind of large military. In '83, I was able to go out with up to 700-800 rebels at a clip. That didn't happen anymore. They created whole black armies that were recruited from Venezuela, Chile, Honduras, and other places that didn't exist. They were ghost armies, roughly, or they call them cazador, hunter battalions. They're about 350, very well trained, very well equipped, and we would go up into Morazan and come upon the aftermath of tremendous fire, and yet there was no record of a Salvadoran army ever being there. They brought in all sorts of CIA, mostly ex-Cuban operatives, including Felix Rodriguez, who had been part of the effort to hunt down Che Guevara. Indeed, he would show us Che Guevara's wristwatch that he was wearing, taken off Che's body. So there's a kind of classic example of the heavy intrusion of empire to thwart. Half of the population in El Salvador at the time was landless. And most of the land was owned by these coffee barons, roughly 10 families, they called them, the big 10 families. It was, it was worse than serfdom. People living in tremendous poverty and deprivation. And when they tried to organize peacefully in terms of building labor unions, they were literally gunned down in the streets. They put machine guns up on the roofs of buildings in the capital. And then when people began to resist, the death squads, when I got to the country, were killing between 700 and 1,000 people a month. It was butchery, which we funded and largely orchestrated. You saw the same thing in Iraq, by the way. When things broke down in Iraq, they took James Steele, who I knew, colonel. He had been the head of the military group in El Salvador, who had worked with the death squads. They moved him to Iraq, and he organized the Shiite death squads, which carry out a reign of terror to break the Sunni resistance. And really, if you really want to look at it, create groups like ISIS. And that's how empire works. And when you're up close, as I was for 20 years, and you see the inner workings of empire, you understand how vicious and ruthless and brutal it is. But it's, very hard to penetrate within the heart of empire that reality, so that reporters such as myself who would report on these things were under constant attack, not only from the State Department and from the government, but from, eventually I was working for the Dallas Morning News in Central America and later for the New York Times, but from our own Washington bureaus that were being spun a fictitious narrative, and we were kind of demonized as, being the fifth front of the rebel movement. And of course, 22 reporters were killed in El Salvador, some of them assassinated by the death squads. It was, the pressure that empire will put on those few reporters who attempt to go out and actually report is fierce and can even involve, the loss of life. In
reference to the Iraq War in 2003, and war is a force that gives us meaning, you said that, quote, the notion that the press was used in the war is incorrect. The press wanted to be used.
Yeah.
Isn't that the antithesis of what journalism should be, wanting to be used?
Yeah, but, journalists are careerists like anyone else, and they know how to advance within the system. So let's take, for instance, the first Gulf War, which I covered, where they had very draconian press restrictions. So you could only be in a pool. I mean, I didn't do it. I speak Arabic. I was out in the desert, and then Cheney drew up a list of 10 journalists he wanted expelled, of which I was top of the list, but they couldn't find me because I was sleeping. I was kind of ridiculous. You wouldn't think I'd be that hard to find in Saudi Arabia. No, the press goes limp in front of the military. I mean, first of all, real war correspondents, people who really know the culture of war and have covered it. I think you're talking a couple dozen. Most of them get sent over from their Washington bureau. And I mean, I would literally watch them dress up in military uniforms and go sit in a 5-star hotel in Dhahran to hear Schwarzkopf and sit in the front row. And they weren't anywhere near a war, nor did they want to go near a war. And that's true with every war I covered. Only about 10, 15%. Photographers are a little more honest because they have to get out. They don't really want to cover the war. And that's covering wars is a kind of insanity. I have a kind of even empathy for that. But then you shouldn't be there. And the people who, create these kind of heroic narratives around their soldiers or their leaders and tell the story the way they're rewarded for it. They're rewarded by the institution. They're rewarded by the military itself. And in the first Gulf War, that whole pool system was not actually administered by the military. It was administered by fellow journalists. I mean, I used to call them Judenraten. It's insane. But it coupled with the fact that they didn't really want to get anywhere near the fighting. That's the truth of it. And secondly, that they understood what was good for their career. And their career took precedence over the truth. And that's not uncommon, unfortunately.
And in 2003, you were booed at Rockford College, and you were shamed off stage. I mean, it's just ironic because...
Well, no, I wasn't shamed off stage. I was forced off stage.
You were forced off stage.
I was willing to keep going. They cut my mic. And then campus security suggested that it was time for me to leave. So, yeah.
It's just the symbolism of that is so ironic because, of course, the woman that you were just speaking of earlier and her opposition to World War I. And then we go to the New York Times' response to this, right, which is just hysterical because they're saying you're damaging the paper's impartiality, meanwhile lauding people like Judith Miller at the time who just became literal stenographers. I mean, what was your reaction to that? Did you know at that time that it did just become a complete farce, or were you slighted?
Well, I knew. I mean, I'd been at the paper for 15 years, so I knew the consequences for a news reporter. I mean, columnists can say, but of course, columnists are selected by the establishment. I would never be selected as a columnist. You would select Thomas Friedman or whoever, who's not going to make those kinds of statements. No, I was conscious of the game I was playing and the danger in terms of where I was going. But I had spent 7 years in the Middle East. I understood the folly of what we were doing. I felt that as an Arabist, I had a platform and a duty to speak, because people I cared about would and finally were killed in Iraq. And, I really, of course, deep sixed my career. But on the other hand, I really couldn't have lived with myself, given the consequences of what has been done in Iraq. Over 1 million dead. Iraq is a unified country, is never coming back. You know, what is it, 4 million refugees and displaced. It had one of the most modern infrastructures in the Middle East. It's been destroyed. And out of these failed states that we created, or these, you know, failed enclaves, we've seen the rise of groups like Al Qaeda in Iraq, and which has, you know, finally morphed into ISIS. So, no, I was aware of what I was doing, but you know, nobody likes to lose their job, but I don't think I could have looked back and done anything differently.
Mm-hmm. I mean, especially since you're covering already the devastation of the Gulf War, targeting of just crucial infrastructure at that point, and then followed by these harsh sanctions that took the life of 500,000 children. I mean, how the hell could anyone support this continued military adventure over there?
Well, because so much of it's about natural resources. I mean, in terms of, you know, they always justify their intervention based on, you know, bringing democracy and fighting barbarism, while everybody sort of turns their back on the Congo, where atrocities are far worse. So
Cobalt.
Yeah. So, you know, Empire, I'd written a column where I said, you know, you can't be a socialist unless you're an anti-imperialist and an anti-militarist. Because it's really those forces. And, you know, we have to remember that the arms industry is a for-profit industry. Mm-hmm. We sell 40% of the world's weapons. We have to break the back of empire, not only for what empire is doing to what Frantz Fanon calls the wretched of the earth, but for what it's doing at home. Because as it disembowels the country, the harsh forms of control that empire uses on the outer reaches of empire migrate back to the homeland. So you get wholesale surveillance, militarized police, indiscriminate use of lethal force on our city streets. We're in Baltimore, where you don't have to go very far to see that. And destruction of our most basic civil liberties. I mean, this is the disease of empire. It goes all the way back to Thucydides, who saw that as Athens expanded, it destroyed its own democracy. So as Thucydides wrote, the tyranny that Athens imposed on others, it finally imposed on itself. And we're no exception. And that's what's happening. You know, we should be cognizant of the suffering of the Palestinians and the Iraqis and the Afghanis and the Yemenis and the Pakistanis. You know, we should be cognizant of the power of the industrial weapons, the missiles, the 1,000-pound iron fragmentation bombs that we're dropping. We're not. I mean, you know, I think only those of us who've been near the receiving ends of these weapons understand how widespread this lethal force is, the power of these weapons. But, you know, it ultimately has reverberations for us, which are already very, very extensive. I mean, the forms that empire uses to control subject populations abroad are now visible on, you know, within America itself.
Yet even the most quote-unquote populist candidate today, Bernie Sanders, widely popular among, you know, people who are so-called radical leftists, he has refused to confront the war industry and the crimes of empire, and continues to do so.
Right.
You've pointed this out time and again. Why is this issue the most important thing to confront?
Well, because what you had after World War II, with the fusion of the so-called defense industry, the war machine, the arms industry, and the corporatists who profit off of war, is what John Ralston Saul correctly calls a coup d'etat in slow motion. And you can't challenge one weapon system. It used to be in the 60s, Proxmire and others would challenge this weapon system, and that's over. We mask how much we spend. Officially, we spend a little more than 53% of discretionary spending on defense. Well, that's just not true. It doesn't count Veterans Affairs. Mm-hmm. It doesn't count our nuclear weapons program, and, you know, it doesn't count all of the black agendas, black budgets that we're not allowed to see. So best estimates are that we're spending $1.6, $1.7 trillion a year. And you can't talk about serious reform when you are diverting such massive amounts of your resources towards the war machine. That's what Martin Luther King's 1967 speech at Riverside Church understood, that we can't build what Johnson called the new society, the Great Society, and maintain imperial war. So, Bernie has voted for every military appropriations bill there is to continue these wars. He doesn't challenge either the military establishment. Indeed, he's been quite welcoming of defense contractors into the state of Vermont because, provides jobs, and, they try and divvy up $10 billion per state because they have the ability to do so. But if we don't break the back of the war machine, if we don't break the imperialist project, if we don't terminate the for-profit arms industry, then any rhetoric about significant change is smoke in the wind.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, that's when Martin Luther King Jr. began to be obsolete in the mainstream media and exiled largely when he started talking about militarism.
They took away his FBI protection, and both King and Johnson knew what that meant. Because of the number of death threats he received, it meant he was doomed. And
you quoted Engels in one of your recent speeches on this point, which said that it's either barbarism or socialism.
Yeah, it's often
forward.
attributed to Luxemburg. She stole it, but it did come from Engels. Yes, it is really between barbarism or socialism. Either we reconfigure our relationship to each other and to the planet in a radical way, or these forces, which in theological terms are forces of death, will extinguish what hope we have for life. It's that dire, it's that dramatic, as anyone who reads climate change reports understand. And this is the folly of empire. This is how empires destroy themselves and always have. I mean, it's how the Roman Empire, you expand militarily beyond your capacity to sustain yourself. And that's precisely what we're doing and what we've done. And the consequences of it, politically, economically, socially, culturally, and finally environmentally, are catastrophic.
We hear about revolution in the U.S. like it's some romanticized thing, that it can never happen here, something that only happens in other places. But you've covered so many uprisings, some successful. What has it taught you about the potential for revolution here?
Well, when a political system is seized by a tiny cabal, whatever it is, military oligarchs, and the system seizes up and only serves the interests of that narrow elite, then there is always blowback. That blowback may not be good. I mean, if you go back to the 1930s, that blowback came in the form of fascism. In the 1930s in the United States, it came from an enlightened oligarchy led by Roosevelt, and Roosevelt writes about it quite openly. In essence, he says to his fellow oligarchs, either you give up some of your money or we really face the specter of revolution. And we still had the old Communist Party. We had movements severely weakened after World War I, but they were still there, the Progressive Party and others, that were able to frighten the oligarchs into creating the New Deal, 15 million jobs, public works, all these kinds of things, many of which, the parks and the post offices, although they're trying to sell off the post office, as they did in Britain, we still use today. But after World War II, those forces set out to destroy Roosevelt used to say, my greatest achievement is that I saved capitalism.
You just wrote a great essay that I encourage everyone to read, titled The Real Enemy is Within, in which you write, the reality of empire is nearly impossible to see from the heart of empire. There can be no rational debate about empire with many desperate Americans who've ingested this as their creed. The distortion of neoliberalism has left them little else. It's a potent and dangerous force within the body politic, and it is growing. Of course, those who point out the symptoms of a rotting empire are deemed heretics, traitors, just like they've been since World War I. What is this long-standing inability to counter this dominant narrative? Tell us about our society, where it is today, and how we can possibly combat this mythology.
Well, it's a symptom of the sickness of the society itself. So as people are pushed, for instance, I was just not too long ago in the South, and you have one Confederate memorial after another. I was walking through Montgomery with the great civil rights attorney, Brian Stevenson, who spent his life defending death row prisoners, most of whom were poor and black, of course, in Alabama. And he said, all of this stuff's been put up in the last 10 years. And I said to Brian, this is exactly what happened in Yugoslavia, that as people reached such a point of despair, they retreated into these mythical stories about themselves. And at that point, you can't connect, because you're not speaking about a reality that is defined by verifiable fact. You're speaking about a myth, and I find the rhetoric against Muslims and even the acts now that are carried out against Muslims extremely frightening. I mean, that kind of rhetoric is incendiary. I saw it in every war I covered. You get people to speak in the language of violence, and then they carry out acts of indiscriminate violence. I think we're entering a very frightening and dangerous moment in American history, as the government is increasingly, of course, hostage to corporate power and military power, unable to respond to the citizenry, carrying out acts of austerity, stripping us of our civil liberties. We're the most watched, spied upon, photographed, monitored population in human history, and I covered the Stasi state in East Germany. You will ignite these proto-fascist forces, and it will become sacralized in the Christian religion, and it speaks in the gun culture and the language of violence, and it is a symptom of a dying civilization, because in the end, all this is magical thinking. It's not real, and I think the only way to save ourselves, which is why I'm a socialist, is to reintegrate these people into the economic system and in essence give them hope, give them the possibility of a life. But in fact, of course, we're doing the opposite. We're pushing them further and further into extremists. And as we do that, that will have very frightening political consequences, and there are no shortage of examples throughout human history to prove that.
Thank you so much, Chris Hedges.
Thank you.
An honor.
Events told by their main figures. Research findings that transcend our people's views.
Monsanto se ve entre un buen sector de los agricultores como una gran amenaza.
Hay un montón de gente que se va a España a trabajar, a otro sitio a trabajar. No tienes que estar aquí siempre para que ayude a tu pueblo.
Desde entonces estoy buscando a mi nieto. Por gente liberada, he sabido que es un varón. Hace poco ha cumplido 6 años. Alguien lo tiene.
No somos simples estudiantes que venimos, entramos, escuchamos la clase de un profesor y después nos levantamos y nos vamos, sino que entendemos lo que pasa y sobre todo tenemos que ser sujetos de cambio frente a lo que pasa y tenemos que tener un rol en nuestra educación y en nuestra sociedad.
teleSUR Report on Monday, only on teleSUR.
Bueno, muchas gracias. Si quieres cantar conmigo, Paco, con mucho gusto.
Por tu bien.
No lo dejan. Perdón por la intrusión, pero es que estamos filmando un documental sobre Roque Dalton y queríamos filmar aquí en el DF, si ustedes nos lo permiten, la lectura de un poema de Roque sobre el DF. Lo escribió en 1961 Roque Dalton, cuando estaba exilado en la Ciudad de México. Fue uno de sus primeros largos exilios. Y el poema se llama Ya ves cómo. Y dice: ya ves cómo de todo lo que esperabas, ayer en las tertulias de la facultad, solo has venido a ser el gran amor del exilado. Tú, que ibas a irte con los príncipes de fiesta por Europa, que ibas a heredar a 3 o 4 viejos honorables, tú, la del coche envidiado y el traje de piel olorosa, tú, la de los grandes brazaletes de plata, pero sobre todo tú, la de los ojos más bellos en toda la extensión de la ciudad, ahora estás dormida en los brazos del pobre solitario. Yo veo la crucecita brillante en tu pecho, mi retrato de Marx en la pared, y creo que la vida, a pesar de todo, es bellísima. Roque Dalton, para ustedes. En México, Roque Dalton estudiará antropología, que era una de las escuelas progresistas en esos años de la Ciudad de México, que además tenía la virtud de que reunía a un montón de estudiantes de toda América Latina. De ahí pasará por primera vez a Cuba, donde trabaja en Radio Habana y en Casa de las Américas. El contacto con Casa de las Américas sería fundamental, le abre la mirada a cosas que se están produciendo en esos momentos en La Habana fundamentales, como toda una corriente testimonialista muy brillante y un fuerte momento de la poesía cubana vinculada a la revolución. Dirá, como poeta fue en Cuba donde adquirí conciencia de lo que significa escribir en serio, de ser un escritor profesional, alguien que escoge la literatura como oficio.
Yo me siento complacido, muy contento, como te digo, todo lo que se haga por divulgar a Roque. A principios del 62, cuando llego a Cuba, el partido estaba llamando gente de la juventud y había llegado bastante gente.
Para entrenar.
Yo me acuerdo en el Hotel Habana Riviera cuando aparece el Roque. Y hola muchachos, hola muchachos. Y todo, y mirándose, todo el mundo desconfiando. Y el Roque, que hablen pues, cuéntenme cómo está El Salvador. Y uno nos mirábamos al otro, ¿verdad? El Roque, en son de animarlo, empezó a provocarlos, ¿verdad? Y dijo, se sentó en la alfombra. Vengan a sentarse conmigo, hombre, vengan así. Uno que es, que le decimos, todavía está vivo, le decimos el diablo, ese se fue a sentar ahí a la alfombra con él. Bueno, pendejo, le digo, ¿y qué es la jodedera tuya de que hablemos? ¿Y qué querés? Pues le digo, decimos qué querés. Y entonces le queda viendo Roque. ¡Qué vergón, cabrón! Le dijo, esos son los guanacos que yo quiero conocer. Le digo, pues ¿cómo te llamas? Y ya aquel le dio el seudónimo. Pero poco a poco se fueron acercando.
¿Cuántos eran?
En ese momento
¿Una docena?
Como una docena, pero terminamos siendo 2 docenas los que ya llegamos a la montaña.
Ajá.
Era divertido, porque fíjate que el entrenamiento no creas que era, no sé si así serán los entrenamientos en todas partes, desguazar todas las piezas de todo lo que había ahí, ametralladoras, bazucas, todo. Y ahí nos vendaban los ojos y cada quien tenía que ir a buscar cada piececita o pieza grande, porque ¿qué voy a armar? Yo voy a armar las 50, es la más fácil, pues, y las grandes bodoques de piezas ahí, ¿va? Y el Roque, eso sí, al principio era un poco... nosotros éramos obreros, estábamos acostumbrados a las cosas de herramientas. Él no, pues, vea. Entonces yo me acuerdo que decía, muchachos, y ustedes no tienen un resortillo que sea menos duro que este día, porque se habían quedado a agarrar el que le tocaba a esa pieza, a esa arma. Y era así, esas cosas de Roque tan de cipote, pues, tan de muchacho.
¿Lo volviste a ver en los 70s?
No, ya.
¿Cuando él volvió?
No, ya no.
En 1964, Roque Dalton regresa clandestino a El Salvador. Es denunciado, su foto aparece en los periódicos, hay órdenes de captura, trae la instrucción de partido de que hay que ganar la calle. Se reúne en los bares en El Salvador con sus viejos compañeros y amigos, es denunciado y detenido.
Él lo mandaron a una prisión en un pueblo que se llama Cojutepec.
Sí.
Hubo un terremoto aquí y se rajaron las paredes y todo eso. Con las paredes rajadas y todo eso, pudo abrir un hueco que quedó y por ahí se saltó. Y enfrente estaba una línea de gente esperando un bus y lo vieron cuando saltaron, pero la gente, nadie dijo nada. Roque parecía un mendigo, sucio, barbudo, el pelo largo, y él corrió hasta que se fue a la carretera y toda la noche caminó hasta llegar a Ilopango.
10 kilómetros.
Y a Ilopango ya pasaban buses. Y en uno de esos buses se subió. Y da la casualidad que va un muchacho universitario ahí en el bus. Él allí le habla al muchacho y el muchacho se sorprende, va con la esposa. Y le dice que se ha escapado. Y le pidió que le dijera al rector de la universidad que él estaba vivo y que se había escapado y que ellos lo habían visto porque toda la gente creía que hasta podía estar muerto.
Y fue la salida para México, ¿no?
Y fue la salida para México. Y estando allá, el partido le dice que ellos prefieren que se vaya para Checoslovaquia a ser representante de la revista internacional allá en Praga. Allá estuvimos 3 años.
Están los manuscritos sin correcciones, de tal manera que esta es la pasada máquina. Es un poema sobre México que se llama DF. Desde la altura de su profundidad, el Teocalli oculta la sangre hecha ya polvo de los siglos. Entre los ojos que cayeron como relámpagos sobre los códices solemnes y que aún duerme en su sueño sorpresivo, inaugurado lanzazos en la espalda desnuda, el paso de los transeúntes, mella el último ápice de honor, deja pura saliva, acuña, paso ciego, establece el insulto, dado al aire, que se destila en los resumideros. Qué bueno es, qué bueno es. Ya, no tocamos más. Vámonos, chicos, no le demos más lata.
No es lata, no ha sido un gusto.
Por eso me gustan los salvadoreños. Se le ocurrió hacer un Roque Dalton punk. ¿Cómo se te ocurrió hacer un Roque Dalton punk?
Pues la idea viene del espacio Zapata. Cuando vi a Zapata punk, dije, bueno, nosotros tenemos nuestro Zapata, ¿no?
Ustedes tienen su Zapata sin duda.
Y este iba a estar en un museo, lo quisimos hacer adentro de un museo. Pedimos permiso y nos lo negaron. Pero ya era la naturaleza, creo yo, al final de Roque, que tenía que estar en la calle.
Sí, Roque tenía que estar en la calle. ¿Y es delito? ¿Es delito El Salvador?
Pues sí.
Ahora ya somos cómplices, compadre. El Salvador no ha acabado de recuperar a Roque Dalton. A pesar de 2 gobiernos consecutivos de izquierda, la figura de Dalton no está donde debería estar en todos lados. Afortunadamente, está en la calle, en ese Roque punk, que lo haría feliz a Roque Dalton verse a sí mismo de punk, al muchacho rebelde que fue siempre. Roque dice y escribe: mis lágrimas, hasta mis lágrimas se endurecieron. Yo que creía en todo, en todos, yo que solo pedía un poco de ternura, lo que no cuesta nada, a no ser el corazón, ahora es tarde ya. Ahora la ternura no basta. He probado el sabor de la pólvora. Padre,
Muchas
gracias. Trae una bonita mancha de pintura negra, oficio de grafitero. Muchas gracias.
Gracias.
Muy chingón.
Gracias, de verdad.
En 65, la vida de exilio de Roque Dalton continúa. Es delegado del Partido Comunista Salvadoreño en Checoslovaquia, donde participa en la revista Internacional y funciona como contacto y nexo del exilio comunista del Salvador y los contactos con el resto de los países latinoamericanos. Vive una vida estable, produce, escribe y escribe mucho. Me da mucho gusto poderte entrevistar.
Igualmente, ¿no?
Me da mucho gusto. Quiero volver a Praga, donde ya tienes suficiente memoria viva como para acordarte de cosas. El frío. Praga no es para salvadoreños, compadre. ¿Lo recuerdas? ¿Lo registras? ¿La familia lo registra?
Nosotros, emocionados, vimos cuando comenzó
a nevar, compadre. ¿Qué dijo?
A la ventana. No, mis recuerdos de niño eran absolutamente de sueño.
Y era cervecero, además, ¿verdad?
Sí.
Era, como dicen en México, chelero.
Al llegar al departamento en el que vivíamos, fue destrabar del techo una bomba grande, que era la lámpara, lo que cubría la lámpara. Entonces, en esa nos mandaba a nosotros a comprarle la cerveza, a que nos llenaran la bomba esa de cerveza. Y yo, en ese caso, nos íbamos...
Metiendo el dedo.
Comiendo la
espuma.
Ese sí, mi papá era cervecero.
Jorge. Ya. Y aquí estás aquí viste a tu padre. En esto era un cine.
Bueno, esto era el Cine Fausto, que era la cadena de cines que había en los 50, los 60. Y este era el barrio donde yo nací, aquí a 2 cuadras, la casa que vivíamos. Y yo, de los hermanos, era el único que no había tenido un contacto visual ni directo con mi padre, ¿no? Y recuerdo que este fue para mí el primer encuentro que yo tuve.
¿Cuántos años tenías?
Tenía que haber tenido como unos 4 años. Sí. Era muy chico. Y yo vine por esa esquina y cruzamos la calle.
¿Venías solo?
Venía con la empleada de la casa.
Ajá.
Y aquí me encontré con mi padre. Ya la empleada se tuvo que ir al mercado de San Miguelito. Y la idea parece que mi padre tenía era llevarme a pasear a algún lado. Pero en ese momento, por esta misma calle, que es la Avenida España, venía un carro patrulla. Y entonces él inmediatamente me carga. Ajá. Y compra unos boletos en el cine.
Y te mete al cine.
Y nos metemos en el cine, que estaban dando una dura noche de los Beatles. Y fue una cosa muy bonita porque para mí ese encuentro significó el encuentro por primera vez con mi padre, el encuentro con los Beatles por primera vez y el encuentro con el cine. Pues este barrio ya que hace años que cayó en decadencia.
Pero era un barrio pobre, ¿no?
No, en un tiempo no. Ahora aquí hay pandillas y todo. Nosotros vivimos en Checoslovaquia hasta...
Poco antes de la primavera.
Poco antes de la primavera. Nosotros llegamos a La Habana el 24 de diciembre de 1967.
Y luego en Cuba tu padre se integra muy bien en el equipo de Casa de las Américas. Se relaciona con lo más interesante de la intelectualidad que conocía a muchos ya previamente.
Sí, mi padre ya con esos años anteriores a que nos vamos definitivamente a La Habana, estando todavía nosotros viviendo en Praga, ya mi padre tiene una relación bastante grande con toda la intelectualidad que empieza a llegar allí, que algunos eran parte de lo llamado el boom de la literatura latinoamericana. Cuba se convierte en un centro de conspiración literaria como nunca, ¿no?
Son los años además que pasa una segunda etapa de entrenamiento militar.
Sí, yo creo que esas dos cosas, ¿no? El poeta y el hombre interesado en aportar
todo lo que era América Latina en ese momento de la lucha armada. Pues yo no consideraba que mi padre pudiera ser un hombre de armas, ni de... Yo no creo que era yo consideraba que a lo mejor no iba a poder sobrevivir por su...
¿Pero qué lo veías? ¿Como físicamente enclenque?
Era muy flaco. Y como yo lo veía siempre jodiendo, pues me parecía que...
Bromeando.
Que los jodedores no sobreviven en los campos de batalla.
Roque Dalton llega a El Salvador en diciembre de 1973, clandestino, ya para incorporarse a las filas del ERP dentro de un proyecto de desarrollar la lucha armada en El Salvador. Hay, casi desde el principio, un clima de confrontación con la dirección del ERP. Roque escribe, además, en estos momentos, los poemas clandestinos firmados con diferentes seudónimos.
El jefe del Partido Comunista, Marcial, no tenían interés en traerse a Dalton para El Salvador. Entonces, la oportunidad que se les surge de regresarse de La Habana es a través de los contactos que tuvo en La Habana Alejandro Rivas Mira con la gente del Partido Comunista
¿De dónde
cubano.
venía Rivas Mira? ¿Quién era en esos momentos?
Rivas Mira era un estudiante universitario. Fue uno de los primeros que comenzó a meterse con el tema del movimiento 68 en París. Él estudió en Europa un tiempo y comenzó a urdir la idea de levantamiento armado como una de las alternativas que miraba para el país. Bueno, Roque regresa en la Navidad del año 1973. Ingresa clandestinamente a San Salvador. Lo que se sabe a través de los testimonios que se han recogido a lo largo de los años es que él llegó esa noche, fue recibido en el apartamento que tenía en el centro de San Salvador. Alejandro Rivas Mira, que es justamente la persona a quien se señala como el artífice intelectual del asesinato. Bueno, Roque pasó esa noche ahí, luego pasó a una segunda casa.
Y entonces pasa a la clandestinidad urbana, porque va a estar durante 2 años sumergido en la clandestinidad urbana.
Sumergido en la clandestinidad. Recientemente se ha comenzado a conocer parte de la correspondencia que Dalton tuvo durante ese periodo. Hay un rastreo interesante de esa correspondencia que tuvo con su madre en San Salvador, en el barrio San Miguelito, con su esposa, con sus hijos que estaban todavía en La Habana. Tiene una actividad esencialmente de formación política e ideológica, pero también recibe algún adiestramiento militar, por lo que sabemos. De hecho, la causa aparente que hace posible que él sea sometido a ese proceso ingrato es porque él venía de un ejercicio militar en la zona del lago de Ilopango y esa noche no llegó a tiempo a entregar las armas al lugar donde tenía que entregarlas. Esa fue una falta disciplinaria muy grave y ahí comenzó, digamos, fue como el pretexto que hizo posible que se abriera el proceso, que aparentemente ya había un contexto de animadversión, había un contexto de lucha ideológica interna un poco fuerte.
Tampoco están claras que se debatía. Se dice que la posición de Dalton era para generar un movimiento social mucho más amplio, para darle base a la guerrilla, mientras que había una tendencia militarista en la...
Sí. Eso es, dijéramos, lo que se dice con mucha frecuencia.
¿Qué podía ganar una fuerza como RP asesinando a un dirigente con tanto prestigio popular a nivel internacional incluso, ¿no?
Sí, justamente por eso es cuando se urde la idea de que este fue parte de un proceso un poco más complejo. Esto es un poco el antecedente de esto, es la captura de Roque Dalton que tiene en los años 60, que es entrevistado por un agente de la CIA y todo esto. No hay ninguna evidencia de que hubiera sido él un hombre de la CIA ni nada semejante.
Absurdo pensar.
Absurdo, pero dijéramos, lo acusan de ser un doble agente. Que era un agente de la CIA y un agente de los cubanos. Sí, es una trama novelesca que hace todavía el mito de Dalton mucho más complejo, mucho más rico y es una cosa que sigue siendo debatida.
¿Qué sabemos sobre su muerte? Porque hay muchas versiones.
La versión de que fue arrojado aquí en el playón es una de las 2 versiones que yo conozco mejor. La otra versión es que después de que fue asesinado, fue enterrado en los alrededores de la colonia Montserrat, que era donde tenía la casa de habitación, donde estaba
la casa de seguridad, ¿dónde estaba?
La casa de seguridad. No hay posible manera de saber si el cadáver está ahí. Lo único que saben decirlo son las personas que lo hicieron o los que ordenaron su asesinato.
Algunas de las cuales están vivas.
Están vivas y hay un pacto de silencio muy cerrado sobre decir quiénes son quiénes son los ejecutores directos de su asesinato y dónde está su cuerpo.
También hay versiones sobre si le dieron un tiro en la nuca, lo fusilaron o lo envenenaron.
Sí, bueno, la versión que cuenta Eduardo Sancho, que fue el que jugó el papel de abogado de Dalton, que era parte de la dirección del RP en ese momento, es que entraron al cuarto, le soltaron un primer tiro, quedó mal herido, lo sacaron a un patio, le dieron de golpes y luego le dieron un disparo en la nuca y que ahí quedó. El caso de Dalton es un tema de impunidad. Claro, procesos legales podrán decir que ya pasó el periodo para que esta cosa no procure causa. Y eso dijéramos, es una cosa que el país sigue esperando, no solamente en el caso de Dalton, que es el caso quizás el más reconocido, el más emblemático, sino también en el caso de otro montón de personas que tuvieron una muerte ingrata. Fue un crimen injusto, fue un crimen horrendo, como dijo Cortázar en su momento.
Para mi generación, Roque Dalton fue una figura mayor, no menor, mayor. La alegría con la que va la vida, tanto como poeta como ensayista, fue muy importante para nosotros. Pero en El Salvador ha habido esta recuperación.
No creo. El homenaje a mi padre, sin embargo, se hace fuera de todo acto oficial. Yo voy a Estados Unidos, donde están los migrantes, y ¿cómo se llama? Y me emociona, y he llorado con ellos.
No te angusties, yo he llorado también con los poemas de tu padre, no eres el único. No podemos renegar de las emociones, no podemos renegar de lo mejor de Roque Dalton, ¿no? Que es la manera como desenfadada, alegremente, hipercríticamente vivió la vida.
Ya que no hay un reconocimiento oficial, pues entonces ese reconocimiento que hacen los jóvenes a través de los muros, pues eso a mí me parece maravilloso.
Esperemos que este documental pueda poner una gota de arena en algo tan merecido como es el reconocimiento a uno de los grandes, que además es uno de los nuestros. Jorge.
Gracias, Paco.
Al revés, todo lo contrario. Un honor estar contigo sentado aquí hoy.
Fíjate que hace poco estuvimos en un proceso de búsqueda del cadáver de mi padre en la zona del Playón. Se hicieron varias exploraciones, varias excavaciones y no encontramos nada. Parece que se van a hacer otras búsquedas, pero hay una cosa simbólica. Mi padre le hace un poema que se llama La Siempre Viva. La Siempre Viva es una flor que nace en las partes áridas. Entonces a mí me emocionó mucho ver que allí donde es posible que el cadáver de mi padre esté escondido,
está lleno de siempre
está
vidas.
lleno de siempre vidas.
Compadre, muchísimas gracias. Se supone, según las vagas referencias que tenemos, que en este lugar fueron arrojados los restos de Roque Dalton después de asesinarlo. En un lugar llamado El Playón. Pero ¿quién dice que los restos de un poeta muerto recogen su memoria? Dalton hoy, después de tantos años, reposa en otras cosas. Reposa en la tremenda alegría de vivir que desparrama a lo largo de su obra. Reposa en su vocación de luchador social, continuo, permanente, tomando la mejor de las causas, la causa de los pobres. Reposa, desde luego, en los que repiten su poesía. Mucho más que en medio de estas piedras.
Events told by their main figures. Research findings that transcend our people's views.
Monsanto se ve entre un buen sector de los agricultores como una gran amenaza.
Hay un montón de gente que se va a España a trabajar, a otro sitio a trabajar. No tienes que estar aquí siempre para que ayude a tu pueblo.
Desde entonces estoy buscando a mi nieto. Por gente liberada, he sabido que es un varón. Hace poco ha cumplido 6 años. Alguien lo tiene.
No somos simples estudiantes que venimos, entramos, escuchamos la clase de un profesor y después nos levantamos y nos vamos, sino que entendemos lo que pasa y sobre todo tenemos que ser sujetos de cambio frente a lo que pasa y tenemos que tener un rol en nuestra educación y en nuestra sociedad.
teleSUR Report on Monday, only on teleSUR. In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on teleSUR. In a world infested by inequalities, abuse of power, and injustice, the American journalist Abby Martin covers the struggle for fundamental rights worldwide, deepening into the search of files which uncover the empire's strategies through our screen and web platform in English. The Empire Files with Abby Martin. Tuesday, only on teleSUR.
The Catalonian president, Carles Puigdemont, has declared the independence of Catalonia and immediately suspended it in order to start negotiations with Madrid. These are live pictures from outside the parliament in Barcelona. Puigdemont arrived at parliament a few hours ago for an address in which he said he might declare independence. He drew large cheers from the members of the Catalan Assembly when he said he would respect the result of the referendum on October 1st and assume independence. Catalonia has to be independent, he said, but moments later, he requested that Parliament suspend that same declaration of independence to give time to start a dialogue with the Spanish government in Madrid. Our correspondent, Vincent Montagun, is following the dramatic events in Barcelona. He joins us now for a live update. Hello, Vincent. We're going to have that interview with Mr. Montagut in a couple of minutes. So, present organizations in Colombia say the number of campesinos killed by the police in Thursday's Tumaco massacre could rise. The leader of the National Coca Growers Organization say they believe there are still more bodies in the forested area, but the police and military are preventing anyone from getting into that part of the forest to check. The Colombian government has admitted that the police fired on the campesino, and they say that 6 were killed, but the campesinos say that number is actually closer to 8 or 10. Lorena Hoyos is in Tumaco, and she files this report.
Compañeros, buenos días. Good morning. We are here in the rural part of Tumaco in the Llorente municipality, where the concern, sorrow, and fear in the community continues to affect the campesinos. While they continue to bury their comrades who were killed days before, they continue to demand the whereabouts of the rest of their fellow community members who were disappeared, as they witness the forced eradication of illicit crops. Yesterday, we were based in 2 municipalities near the site of the massacre, and at one of the municipalities, the Pinal, in the morning, anti-riot police shot tear gas at protesting campesinos who were out demanding to stop the forced eradication of the illicit crops. In the Puerto Rico municipality, we saw how there was a large police presence on the ground and in the air. Helicopters flew over the area, causing fear and tension among residents. The campesinos insist that the government follow the Havana peace accords between the FARC and the government. They want to exchange the coca crops for better life conditions, for food crops, for roads which will allow them to sell their produce, and for guarantees that will enable them to change their lives. But until now, the government remains deaf to the campesinos' demands. Meanwhile, community leaders are waiting to meet with the Vice President, Oscar Naranjo. They expect the government to reply with justice and truth regarding this massacre. Today, there will also be a verification commission of the crime scene, where they will take testimonies and try to find out what is still occurring, because according to communities, there are still bodies of campesinos which have not been buried. We will continue to follow and report from Colombia.
So that's our report from Lorena Hoyos, and we turn now to our correspondent, Vincent Montagut. He's been following the dramatic events in Barcelona. He joins us now for a live update. Hello, Vincent. What's happening in Barcelona?
To our audience in teleSUR English. We're living very important moments. There was a reference to the ex-president Catalan who was killed by the Franco regime. Thousands of Catalan citizens have followed the speech by the Catalan president. It's a very important speech by the Catalan president.
Hello. Hello. Sí, me puede ayudar, el audio está terrible hoy.
Okay, so we have to say goodbye to Vincent and on to some other stories. The victims of the Tumaco massacre in the south of Colombia were from neighboring Ecuador. teleSUR has been to the Ecuadorian border town of San Lorenzo and we have this exclusive report.
This is San Lorenzo on Ecuador's northern coast, just across the border from Colombia. It's here that victims of the Tumaco massacre fled, and they are in no doubt about who attacked them.
It's a bad attitude from the Colombian government. How can they massacre Colombian campesinos like that? There was no confrontation at all.
They had to flee across the border to Ecuador, and they're still scared of what the Colombian security forces might do. But they tell their story.
The police shot at all of us, and that was just not right. There should be justice and respect for peasants' rights.
Among the victims was one Ecuadorian who's seeking medical attention. The others say the authorities have ignored their complaints. The same goes for some of the media, who they say are covering up the violence.
There's one Ecuadorian here who is wounded in his ribs. I think he's getting a medical report now.
Human rights advocates who work in these rural areas, as well as others who witnessed the attack on the campesinos, are appealing to the international community.
We need to clarify what happened and make sure that this does not go unpunished. And we ask the countries that guaranteed the peace process in Havana to please help us shed light on the facts about these peasants and the massacre that they suffered.
Both families of the victims and local organizations are doing everything they can to denounce the state and ensure their rights are respected.
Colombia's former FARC rebels have formally registered as a political party with the country's electoral authorities. 6 leaders said they had delivered all of the required documents to the National Electoral Council, including the certificate of the weapons that they handed in to the United Nations, a process that was completed on August 15th. They welcome what they call the beginning of a new era.
A new era for Colombia is beginning. The mobilization of hope, of rebellion, and of the turmoil of dreams of a people who are tired of the abuses of its leaders and does not want to continue being trampled on. We invite everyone to build a country of respect and to establish a government that gives its citizens humane and caring treatment, that gives them access to food, housing, education, and healthcare.
Senate and House committees are moving towards a vote on a fundamental part of the peace process with the former FARC rebels. It's the statutory law on a special jurisdiction for peace. This week, the session is discussing a measure to ban former guerrillas accused of crimes against humanity from being elected to Colombian Congress. Under the peace agreement signed last year, the former guerrilla movement would have 10 seats in Congress reserved for them for 2 electoral terms. More news in a minute. Stay with us. The campaign to elect the governors of Venezuela's 23 states is entering its final stage. In preparation for the regional elections on October 15th, soldiers stood guard over electoral materials in Caracas. At a military ceremony in Caracas, the government said the election shows that the accusations that Venezuela has become a dictatorship are false.
la última y más gloriosa de sus conquistas. Sistema.
Our correspondent in Caracas, Regan Devines, has been out taking out the pulse of the country as the election campaign nears its end. This is his report.
Hi, Sony. Yes, we're at Plaza Venezuela in Caracas. Just behind me is one of the offices of the National Electoral Council, the CNE. It's actually one of their offices out of quite a few that were vandalized during the months of April to July, when the actions of violent opposition protesters superseded those of peaceful opposition protesters, that ultimately contributed to the loss of over 100 lives here in Venezuela. It's one of the reasons why Venezuelans are becoming more and more nervous as we draw closer to Sunday's regional elections. Who's more nervous is the government. Just yesterday, they deployed their Plan Republica, or Republic Plan, which places emphasis on the country's Bolivarian National Guards, National Bolivarian Guards, who will be charged with the responsibility of not just ensuring the safety of voters, but the security of voting stations across the country. Just over the last election, voting stations were attacked on July 31st for the National Constituent Assembly elections. It was reported that candidates of those elections on July 31st were also attacked. So there is some cause for some nervousness, and the Bolivarian National Guard is mandated to ensure that all goes well on come Sunday. Now, the CNE is reiterating a call to voters to please ensure that they know exactly where they will be going to vote, as some of those polling stations were vandalized. However, if the message was not received, at the front of those voting stations is a note or a message stating exactly where they must go. Now, Hernan Escara, who is not just a prominent lawyer, but one of the members of the National Constituent Assembly, he sits with that National Constituent Assembly, he says that the upcoming regional elections will be proof that a pluralist democracy exists here in Venezuela. And it's an important point, because Venezuela's opposition has been crying that there is no democracy here in Venezuela, and that the country is run by a dictator, by President Nicolas Maduro. Of course, the government has denied this vehemently and has shown quite a few examples why this claim by the opposition holds no water whatsoever. One of the prominent opposition faces, Juan Requenses of the Primera Justicia Party, says that he doesn't trust the CNE, the National Electoral Council. However, he has urged that voters go out and express their right to vote. He says that winning all 23 seats for the opposition will maintain the fight in the street. Whether or not this is a precursor of what is to come is yet to be seen. However, President Nicolas Maduro says that he will not tolerate any form of violence whatsoever for these elections or thereafter. He added as well that after the regional elections on October 15th, that the government and the opposition may continue their peace talks as early as next week, Monday, in the Dominican Republic. And he adds that 95% of what has been discussed thus far has been agreed to by both parties. He says that both parties are close to signing an agreement which hopefully will stabilize peace in Venezuela and lead to a progressive, unified movement to healing Venezuela's economy, which is the wish and request of most, if not all, of Venezuelans here. And that's our update for you. Soini, we'll bring you another tomorrow right here from Caracas, Venezuela. Back to you in studio.
Thank you for that, Regan. The former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff has again rejected any possible U.S. intervention in Latin America as extremely dangerous. She criticized the attempts by the U.S. government to intervene in the political process of some countries, saying that many times the USA has made the mistake of endorsing some opposition parties by saying that they're democratic. In August, U.S. President Donald Trump said he wouldn't rule out a military option in Venezuela.
Não tem condições de analisar o Sr. Trump.
I don't have the right to analyze Mr. Trump. If you find somebody who knows what he is capable of, You let me know, because I don't know. What do I think? I could only say that it is serious, and I can tell you another thing. It's extremely irresponsible and criminal to intervene in Venezuela. Why? Our continent has been living in peace for 140 years. Any attempt to interfere in the legitimate constitutional process in Venezuela, including by forcing a presidential election, is extremely dangerous, as it might lead to a civil war.
The lower house of the Brazilian Congress is moving closer to a vote on the most recent corruption charges against President Michel Temer. The parliamentary rapporteur on the charges, Bonifacio de Andrade, is due to present his report to the Justice Committee of the House, which will then vote on them. If the full House votes to proceed with the charges, they will then return to the Supreme Court to begin the trial. Our correspondent in Brasilia, Adriana Robrenio, has the details.
Here in the Constitutional and Justice Committee of the Brazilian Lower House, we are expecting the rapporteur on the accusations against President Michel Temer, Bonifacio de Andrade of the PSDB party, to present his report either in favor or against those charges of obstructing justice and criminal association, which Brazil's Attorney General presented against President Temer and two of his ministers, Eliseu Padilla and Moreira Franco. So that is what we're expecting today, the presentation of that report. The defense lawyers for each of the accused will then have the chance to speak for the same length of time as the reporters spoke. The members of Congress are now waiting, and the opposition is asking for the accusations to be presented separately. They say that an accusation against the president is not the same thing as those against his ministers. There's also a lot of argument over and criticism of the reporter himself, because he is a member of the PSDB, which gave up its seat on this Justice Committee, and so the Social Christian Party had to give one of his seats to the rapporteur. That has generated controversy, because some people are saying the rapporteur is in favor of the charges, but we will have to wait for his report, which, as we said, should be presented today. There will then be a vote on the charges, but that won't happen today. In any case, whatever happens in this committee, the charges against President Temer will have to go before the full House, where the members will take the definite decision. Now back to you in the studio.
Thank you, Adriana, for that report. Cuba has been celebrating the 149th anniversary of the beginning of the Wars of Independence. President Raul Castro presided over the main event in Santiago de Cuba. He carried an urn with the remains of Manuel Céspedes, regarded as the father of the Cuban nation. They were reburied alongside the graves of the leader of the revolution, Fidel Castro, and José Martí, Cuba's best-known independence leader. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Representatives from the two Palestinian political parties, Hamas and Fatah, are meeting in Egypt's capital, Cairo, for reconciliation talks. The talks come after a week after the Palestinian Authority Prime Minister Rami Hamdallah visited the Gaza Strip to officially begin the process of forming a unity government. The meetings, which took place in Egypt, are aimed at implementing the 2011 Cairo Agreement, which looks to end the 10-year political split between the two parties. And in Palestine, physical and art education graduates protested the high rates of unemployment outside the United Nations Relief and Works Agency in Gaza. Our correspondent, Noah Hazrazin, has the story.
Dozens of unemployed graduates in physical and art education on Monday gathered outside the United Nations Refugees and Works Agency UNRWA office in Gaza to protest against lack of work opportunities. The organizers of the campaign launched a hashtag entitled "Graduate and I Have the Right to Work" to support thousands of graduates who share their suffering. The protesters, who expressed deep concern about potential loss of rights, called for equality with graduates of other specialties.
We came here to call for our rights as graduates in physical and art education, a specialty that has been marginalized from 2000 to 2017. We don't have permanent or temporary jobs. We call to be treated equally with graduates in other specialties. We have the right to get temporary governmental and UNRW jobs.
A decade of Israeli blockade and 3 wars have left about 43% of people in Gaza out of work, according to reports published by Gisha, a non-profit Israeli organization. Unemployment in the Gaza Strip rose by about 0.5% during the first quarter of 2017, making the territory one of the areas with the highest unemployment rates in the world. Noor Harazin, teleSUR TV, Gaza.
And now let's take a look at some of the stories making the news around the world.
Protesters across the country took to the streets in a nationwide strike to condemn President Emmanuel Macron's public sector reforms. Schools, hospitals and transport services, which include airport traffic networks, are among the sectors affected. All major unions, representing around 5 million workers, united for the strike for the first time in decades. An estimated 30% of flights in and out of Paris and other major cities have been cancelled as a result of the nationwide protests. Kenya's main opposition leader, Raila Odinga, has dropped out of the presidential election rerun scheduled for October 26. Odinga announced his withdrawal on grounds that the electoral board behind the annulled vote in August had not been given sufficient reforms. The original vote on August 8th, which saw incumbent President Uhuru Kenyatta claim victory, was annulled by the Supreme Court due to apparent irregularities. Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf cast her vote in Monrovia as she prepares to step down after 12 years in power. Liberians head to the polls to decide a new leader who will replace Sirleaf, who was the first ever female president on the continent. Sirleaf came to power in 2005 and successfully maintained peace and led the country after its devastating set of civil wars, which claimed the lives of an estimated 250,000 people.
People must vote for those who they think will make Liberia a better place. Don't vote because of somebody influenced you to vote. Don't vote because of tribalism or religion or all of that. Vote who you think have the capability, have the means to be able to build upon my legacy so Liberia will be even better after the next 6 years.
At least 11 people have been killed as wildfires continue to sweep across areas of Northern California. Around 1,500 homes and businesses have been destroyed, according to authorities, forcing thousands of people to be displaced. The fires, which are still not under control, are located in California's wine-producing regions of Napa, Sonoma and Mendocino. US authorities have reportedly deployed its largest 747 firefighting aircraft in order to tackle the fires, which are said to be spread across 70,000 acres of territory. Syrian football fans whose dreams of reaching their first ever World Cup were left shattered as they watched their team from Damascus lose to Australia in the second leg qualifier in Sydney. Televised on the big screen from the capital, security concerns have meant that Syria's home and away fixtures be played overseas. Syrians reflected on a game which had a nation's hopes resting on it.
It was a good game, but we need more training. Our team is not fully equipped. We need them to be more equipped in the future.
We've come to the end of this evening's news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For teleSUR English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
This week I sat down with Chris Hedges, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and best-selling author, who's reported from war zones in Latin America, the Middle East, and beyond. His most recent book is titled Wages of Rebellion, The Moral Imperative of Revolt. Hedges is also the host of the new show on teleSUR English, Days of Revolt, with new episodes airing every Monday night. From someone who's been on the receiving end of bullets from El Salvador to Iraq and covered uprisings from North Africa to Europe, I wanted to talk to him about war, propaganda, and revolt. Chris, Eugene Debs, famous socialist candidate back during World War I, was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his opposition to it. And in fact, the Sedition Act made it illegal for anyone to speak in opposition to the war at that time. What does that say about the myth of democracy from that early on?
Well, it says that if you challenge the structures of power, and in particular, particularly military power, you are at best marginalized, if not imprisoned. You know, those kind of few radical voices that held fast, Randolph Bourne, Jane Addams, Eugene Debs, were excoriated in the press. Emma Goldman eventually deported, along with Alexander Berkman and others. So, yeah, it's, you know, war, as Randolph Bourne said, is the health of the state. And what you saw in World War I was the rise of the military corporate machine, which made war against these radicals through the Sedition Act, the Espionage Act, and more importantly, the Committee for Public Information, or the Creel Commission, which created the system of modern mass propaganda, employing the understanding of crowd psychology pioneered by figures like Le Bon, Trotter, and Sigmund Freud, that people were not moved by fact or reason. They were moved by the very skillful manipulation of emotion. And it worked. So you had Hollywood was making films like The Kaiser, The Butcher of Berlin. The Creel Commission had its own news division. You couldn't even write anti-war editorials. It was against the law. It had speakers bureaus, and you only had to use the Sedition Act and espionage on those kind of few figures who held fast to an anti-war stance, of which there were not many. And you read people like Jane Addams, and part of what they are most depressed about is how easily the intellectual class, even the purportedly left intellectual class, was seduced into the war effort. And then after the war, the dreaded Hun becomes the dreaded Red, and we enter what Dwight McDonald calls this psychosis of permanent war in the name of anti-communism. war, the fusion of war and the war profiteers, the militarists and the war profiteers, which after World War II created a situation of total war. I mean, after World War I, factories reconverted for to produce domestic products. After World War II, they kept producing weapons, even though we had peace, so that we could obliterate every Soviet city 10 times over with nuclear weapons. I mean, it was nuts. But with, guaranteed cost overruns and guaranteed profits, that fusion of the militarists and the corporatists hijacked the country, disemboweled the country economically, and made war on all of those advances that had come under the New Deal. So it had both an economic impact and a political impact.
And the U.S. is undoubtedly the world's biggest, most strongest empire, history's biggest and strongest empire, but it operates in a different way than empires past. How has the notion of empire changed over the last century?
America is unique in the sense that it colonized itself. So European countries colonized India, Africa, the Spanish, and the Americas. We destroyed, through acts of genocide, our indigenous communities and plundered their resources. So you had, especially with westward expansion, the U.S. cavalry acting on behalf of the mining concerns, the railroad companies, the timber merchants. And once westward expansion was complete, by the end of the 19th century, you began expansion beyond U.S. borders. That's when you had the Cuban-American War with the seizure of Cuba and the Philippines. You began to see all sorts of gunboat diplomacy throughout the Caribbean and Latin America, in particular Central America. America expanded its power, certainly through the military force and the threat of military force, but more by cultivating indigenous elites that would do our bidding. So you saw the rise of all sorts of dictatorships, whether it was Mobutu in the Congo, or whether Somoza in Nicaragua, or the Shah in Iran, and of course we overthrew the Shah's father and then carried out a coup d'etat to replace Mossadegh, the prime minister who was going to nationalize British oil. That form of colonial power protected Western interests. That's why Allende was overthrown in 1973 and Pinochet was put in power to protect the copper industry from being nationalized. And these elites were given tremendous resources. I mean, you saw the same thing in 1954 in Guatemala with Arbenz, who wanted to challenge United Fruit's huge acquisition of Guatemalan land to give landless peasants, an ability to, carry out subsistence farming. And when that happened, the CIA raised a kind of black army, a huge propaganda effort run by Edward Bernays, the father of modern public relations, who had come out of the Creole Commission. And of course, Arbenz becomes a communist in the eyes of the press, which they, through the manipulation of the press, they are able to justify this. So it's a different kind of empire in the sense that, for instance, British troops actually raised from the Sikhs. We find,